Week 2 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few tight ends I looked at on the wire this week. The first guy, O.J. Howard of the Houston Texans. So Howard, in his first game as a Houston Texan, he showed up with a nice one. 2 catches, 38 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, it's a fluky type of ball game. 2 targets with 2 catches, and they were both touchdowns. But obviously, he was a big-time prospect coming out of college. And over the last few seasons with injuries and just with the Bucs, they were going in a different direction. O.J. Howard wasn't in the plans with, obviously, when Gronkowski was over there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was the backup, and Cameron Brate as well. But so far, week 1, he had a big game as O.J. Howard. But like I said, I think it's fluky, but he's definitely a big target and a red zone target is O.J. Howard. And this week, there's not many that intriguing options on the waiver wire. So right here, O.J. Howard, after coming off a 2-touchdown game, he's definitely a guy to talk about and a guy to go out there and add on your waiver wire if you want him for your bench or if you're in a real pinch at the tight end position and you want to roll the dice next week and start him week 2 with Denver, which should be a tough matchup. But anyway, O.J. Howard, after a nice game, he's a guy to recommend off the waiver wire, and he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. The next guy is Gerald Everett of the Los Angeles Chargers. I've been talking about Everett over the preseason as a guy I think could have a good season in Los Angeles, and so far so good. 3 catches, 54 yards, and a touchdown in week 1 versus the Vegas Raiders. And right here, he's a big target. He's a guy that's pretty quick, and he can run the routes as well as Everett. And we saw it last season at the end of the year as well with Seattle. But right now, Justin Herbert spreads that football out. And if Keenan Allen's going to miss a few weeks here, more targets, I think, we could see go Everett's way in the middle of the field because he looks good. He's an athletic tight end that could even be a wide receiver. That's how talented I think Everett is. And right here with this good Los Angeles Charger offense, he's definitely a guy that's a weapon for fantasy owners in the Chargers. And he's available right now in 73% of fantasy leagues. The next guy is Hayden Hurst of the Cincinnati Bengals. So in his Bengal debut, Hurst had a pretty mediocre day. But like I said, there's not many great tight ends on the waiver wire here. So right here, some of these guys, they're going to have one good week and then one bad week. A lot of inconsistency. But Hurst actually had 8 targets in the ball game, 5 catches for 46 yards. So right now, the Cincinnati Bengals go to Dallas in week 2 here. And I think Hurst could have a decent ball game with similar numbers in that one. So right now in PPR leagues, to pick a tight end off up the waiver wire, if he gets anywhere from 7 to 10 points, I guess you'll take it because tight end's just a crapshoot for the most part. Besides, obviously, the elite guys, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, George Kittle. After that, it's a drop-off for the most part here. But Hayden Hurst, he's definitely a guy that can make some plays. And we saw it a few seasons ago with Baltimore and the Falcons on and off. But right now, that he got 8 targets is a good sign. And obviously, a Cincinnati Bengal offense is a pass-happy. And T. Higgins, we don't know if he's going to play week 2 as well. So if Higgins is out, that's more targets Hurst's way after suffering a concussion versus the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 1. So right here, Hurst available in 90% of fantasy leagues. And he's a tight end that we're giving add to this week. The next guy, Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. So Tonyan, it's good to see him back on the field after coming off an ACL injury last season. And he didn't do much in this ball game. Only 3 catches, 36 yards at the Minnesota Vikings. But he has a good matchup coming up versus the Chicago Bears in week 2 that we know Aaron Rodgers has owned throughout his NFL career. And, Rodgers, he's going to want to get back on the right track after an embarrassing loss by 16 points where the offense just couldn't generate anything in Minnesota in week 1. So Tonyan, on the few catches he made, he looked pretty quick in that game. And he's a guy that a few seasons ago was pretty good and a sleeper that came out of nowhere for the Packers at tight end. So I think Tonyan can help fantasy owners, and he's out there in 77% of fantasy leagues because someone's going to have to catch the ball over there in Green Bay. And there's a lot of young guys at the wide receiving core. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Randall Cobb, the veteran over there. But right now, I think Tonyan could play a major piece here in this offense. And right now, I like the matchup, and I like the way he was running his routes, even though he only had 36 yards in the game. Like I mentioned, there's not much to mention at tight end. But Tonyan was a bright spot for a guy to pick up this week on the wire. This week's Logan Thomas of the Washington Commanders. So 2 seasons ago, he was a top 10 tight end in fantasy points here was Logan Thomas. And it's good to see him back as well. We didn't think he'd be ready for week 1 before the season started. But right now, he was ready and he played. And he had 3 catches, 45 yards on 6 targets. Obviously, a big body guy at 6'7", 6'8", red zone target he could be for this Washington team. And Carson Wentz, he really spread the ball out in week 1. I know it's versus a weak Jacksonville Jaguar defense, but here in week 2, he's got another good matchup at the Detroit Lions that obviously can't stop anyone over the last few seasons. And they gave up 38 points in the week 1 matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. So I think Thomas could have a decent ball game once again. And he's a guy I definitely would recommend on the wire this week. And he's available right now in 94% of fantasy leagues. I know tight end I looked at this week's Will Disley of the Seattle Seahawks. That this week came out with a big ball game on Monday Night Football here, including the first drive with a huge touchdown to start it off with 38-yarders. So Geno Smith looked good in this ball game. He spread the ball out. I know they got a lot of tight ends over there in Seattle, with Parkinson getting a touchdown. Noah Fant, he didn't do much in this game, but they like using a lot of tight end sets with Seattle in this ball game. And Will Disley, a few seasons ago, we saw he was a decent fantasy option. But to get off to a good start here in week 1's a good thing to see, even though I know he only had 3 catches, but 43 yards and a touchdown. And he's a guy to mention this week, available in 100% of fantasy leagues. He's not a guy I'm going to go out there and run to the wire, but a guy definitely to keep in mind, especially tight end being one of the weaker positions in fantasy football. So this week, they're going to use him in a lot of 2 tight end sets minimum. And like I said, Geno Smith's going to spread that football out like he did in that ball. It's not the greatest of matchups at the San Francisco 49ers for either him or pretty much anyone on San Francisco, but we saw the Niners go down in week 1 to the Chicago Bears. And right here, I think Seattle's going to play him tight at least in this ball game. I don't know if they'll win the game, but I think this week he'll make a few plays in this one. And he's definitely a tight end to consider. So that's a few tight ends I looked at on the wire here for week 2 of the fantasy football season.